and we'll be watching the race closely as polls across the country start to close.
While polls in New York don't close until 9, some states are getting ahead of the game.
Our presidential election correspondent, David Rienzo, has what we know about the race so far. David?
Thanks, guys. So we already do have some initial results in. You can see that Oklahoma, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Indiana have already been declared for Donald Trump, giving him the lead for right now at 54% of the votes and 95 of Electoral College. But Kamala Harris still does have some of the votes in the Northeast from Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Maryland, and Delaware, all being declared in her favor. But we still do have a lot of polls still open, especially out west where the sun sets later, so the polls stay open for longer. But we do have a couple states which are soon to be declared. The states are still in the lead. We have some states that we know are going to be, or very sure are going to be red states in this election. And we also have some states that we know are going to be blue states in this election. But the story all comes down to these crucial swing states. You can see Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, as well as Nevada and Arizona are going to be crucial to watch for the rest of the night. So be sure to stay tuned for the rest of your presidential updates. But first, back to them at the desk.
In closing time, there have been a lot of movement in the Electoral College front.
Let's turn it over to our presidential election analyst, David Rienzo. David, how are things looking as the polls get closer to closing in New York?
Right now, the fight is still very close. Kamala Harris has gained a few points in Illinois, as well as New Jersey being declared for Kamala, but Arkansas has also been declared for Donald Trump. So right now, it is 101 to Donald Trump and 71 electoral votes to Kamala Harris. And this is expected to be a very tight race that is really going to come down to the wire. We have a few states that still have a while to report. Maine is soon to be reported, and New York is not to be announced for another 8 minutes at 9 o'clock. And that's when a lot of states are also going to report. Louisiana, New York, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. Those will all release their results at 9 o'clock, and some more states are going to release theirs at 10 and 11 o'clock. So most likely, we will not know the results of this election until really late at night or possibly for another day. If you remember 2020, these results weren't ready for at least a few days after Election Day. I'll have more information in my next block about New York State and other new announces after I come back.
Election correspondent David Rienzo, who has more on the Harris-Trump race.
David, break it down for us.
Thanks, guys. Right now, we are still a little bit stagnant right now. Not much change, but some more precincts are reporting in some very close races. You can't see here because we're only showing the declared winners, but New York is a very contested race, as well as Pennsylvania and Georgia is also very hot. These swing states is what we expected. Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, as well as Nevada and Arizona. We expect these to be very tight. These will probably be the toss-up races that are going to decide this race, because we can tell that these ones are going to be red. These states up in the west, as well as these ones out by the down south in the deep south and on the Atlantic coast. But New York is going to be one of these blue states, so we can expect these to be regularly blue, so we're pretty safe. And Illinois has already been called blue, as well as a lot of these states out in the Northeast. It's these swing states that we really need to keep an eye out, and this is what I'll be updating you on regularly over the course of the night. Pennsylvania, Michigan, those 7 states that I mentioned before, these are going to be the battleground states, the toss-up states that you've really been hearing a lot about, that they're campaigning a lot in Michigan, Pennsylvania, going into Las Vegas. So we will keep you updated when these states get decided. This is how we'll know how the change of the game is going. I'll send it back to you guys in the desk, and I'll have more next time you come to me.
Welcome back to WTOP 10's Election Night coverage. I'm Kenny Gerard.
And I'm Madeline Cummings. Right now we are going to send it back over to our presidential election correspondent, David Rienzo. David, what do you have for us?
Guys, I actually do have a couple important updates. Since you've last checked in on me, New York has officially been declared for Kamala Harris. And for Donald Trump, Nebraska, South Dakota, and North Dakota, as well as Wyoming, have all been called for Donald Trump. So that makes this race even closer. You can see we're still, Kamala Harris just shy of 100 electoral opponents, Donald Trump around 120, and there's still about half of the states that still need to report. We're expecting Texas to be red. That is usually a deep red state. And California is another one of those heavy electoral college voters with nearly 40 votes. So that is usually a blue state. So as soon as those report in, as soon as those precincts are reported, then we'll know that this race is going to be much tighter, just as tight as we are expecting it to be. All the national polls have been in a dead heat for months, really, ever since Joe Biden dropped out. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have been in an extremely tight race, one of the tightest races we've seen in modern election history. We are expecting a couple more states to come in any moment. We've got a couple close races on the Atlantic coast. North Carolina is a swing state. Right now it's leaning red, as well as Georgia, but Michigan and Pennsylvania are both leaning blue at the moment. So all these four states could go either way at any moment. We'll also update you more on New Hampshire and Maine. Maine is interesting, I do want to note, because Maine actually splits up their electoral college votes. So 2 will go to the winner, and then because it has 2 different districts, 2 will go to the winner of the majority, and then another for the less popular candidate. So I will be back with more information on the 2020 election as well as the 2016 to see how they compare to the 2024 election. As soon as we get back to me. Thanks, guys. I got a couple more states just reporting. Texas, Louisiana, and Ohio have all been declared for Donald Trump, which puts him at 177 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 99 votes. However, Kamala Harris does have 74% of the overall votes, and Donald Trump has 52%. So this is still an incredibly tight race. I'd like to take you to Georgia now, where we've got 74% of the precincts reporting, and it is currently leading for Donald Trump. And then out in North Carolina, we have 52% of precincts reporting, which is also leading to Donald Trump. And in Wisconsin, only 7% of the total polls have been reported, and it is currently leading blue, as well as Michigan and Pennsylvania are both leaning towards Kamala Harris. Now, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, as well as Georgia, all went to Joe Biden last year. North Carolina, though, was a red state in the 2020 election, as well as 2016. So this one, while not completely red, this is still all a toss-up. These are all battleground states, so this is still anybody's race. It is still an incredibly tight race. I know right now we have a large deficit between the Electoral College votes, but don't get too confident as a Trump voter, and don't get too down and out as a Kamala voter, because this race is still incredibly tight, and it could be anybody's election. I'll have more information, and as well as some more comparisons between the 2020 and 2016 compared to this year's election. Back to you guys in the studio. Thanks, guys. We do have one new state reporting. Missouri has been called for Donald Trump, putting him now at 188 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 99%. The percentages of the majority vote, popular vote as it's called, is still 74 to 52%, leaning towards Donald Trump. But once again, this is an incredibly tight race. I'd like to take you to Wisconsin right now. Wisconsin is 34% leaning toward 34% of the votes have been cast already, have been counted, and right now it is leaning towards Donald Trump by an incredibly thin margin. It is 49 to 49% leaning towards Donald Trump by, again, just an incredibly sharp margin. Michigan and Pennsylvania are leaning towards Donald Trump. Leaning towards Kamala, I apologize, with 15% reported in Michigan and 39% in Pennsylvania. Georgia and North Carolina are leaning towards Donald Trump, and a majority of their votes have been cast already. We have 80% of the precincts reporting and 65% of the precincts reporting in North Carolina. Another very close rate is out in New Mexico. New Mexico is leaning towards Trump at the moment, and it is 50% Donald Trump, 48% Kamala Harris. So these are incredibly tight races. These could be called any moment, and they could be going either way. This is really a coin flip depending on who's going to – it's an incredibly tight race is really all I can say. It's just like back in 2020 when it was another extremely tight race. I'll have more after you come back to me. But first, back to you guys at the desk. Thanks, guys. So we do have 3 new states to declare. Utah and Montana have been declared for Donald Trump, and Colorado has been declared for Kamala Harris. That brings the new Electoral College totals to 198 for Donald Trump and 109 electoral votes for Kamala Harris. But none of these states are nothing surprising necessarily. We can see back in 2020, Joe Biden won these exact same states, plus the swing states of Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Georgia. But these are the states that lost Hillary Clinton the presidency in 2016. But everything else is still the same as what we are seeing today. You can see that there's only those 5 differences between 2016 and 2020, and there's no differences between what we have now and any of the other maps. So nothing tonight has been a very big surprise. We are still with those solid red and solid blue states, and we're just waiting for those 7 swing states. Those are going to be key in this election. These are what have been so tight already. Michigan right now is leaning towards Kamala Harris. Wisconsin is now leaning towards Donald Trump, and Pennsylvania is leaning towards Donald Trump as well. So it really all comes down to these 7 battleground states in the Electoral College system. I'll have more on New York State specifically, but I'll have all that after the break.
And now it's time to go over to our presidential race and analyst, David Rienzo.
David, can you give us one last update before we go for the night?
Major updates except for Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has been called for Kamala Harris, so now the race is up to 109 to 198, but we are still on the race for that magic 270 mark. Kamala Harris still has a way to go to that. We are expecting a few more states on the West Coast to be declared for her, and as for Trump, we are still expecting some in the Midwest and well as in the South to be declared to Donald Trump. I want to turn your eye to Michigan right now. Michigan has over 20% of the polls are reported, and it is currently 49 to 49.2, leading its way to Harris. Like I've been saying all night, this is incredibly tight. It's going to come down to only a few 100,000 votes, which I know sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of the United States, we have about 50 million registered voters, probably more. So 100,000 really is a very tight margin. This is an incredibly tight race. And again, it is going to come down to those swing votes out in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. This is really going to come down to those 7 states. We saw in the 2020 election, Joe Biden won by just these 5 states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and the 2016, that's how Hillary won. So it's really going to come down to those races, and it is going to be a tooth and nail battle all the way to the end, all the way to the wire. That is all for my presidential election. It probably won't be declared for another few hours. We do have a couple more polling locations to be declared. So this probably won't be declared until tomorrow, probably even the next day. So be sure you stay updated on this presidential election, this historic presidential election. Back to you guys at the desk.
Thanks, David, who's done an excellent job tonight breaking down the presidential election.